Welcome to Standing in the Sunlight with Cynthia Rose. We are all on an ever-unfolding unique journey. Join Cynthia Rose as she begins her unique perspective to all that is meaningful. Topics and personalities that support your path, bringing inspiration and passion and heart-centered ways to live a more fulfilling life. A down-to-earth and uplifting sharing of what it means to be spiritual, creative, and living life to the fullest by standing in the sunlight. Born an intuitive medium, Cynthia Rose is also an ordained minister, singer, astrologer, educator, and writer. She has studied the intuitive and healing arts for over 40 years. Rise up and stand in your sunlight now with Cynthia Rose.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I'm Cynthia Rose. If you're listening on one of the many playbacks, then welcome. Thank you for being here. Just a couple of things. You can always join us at the Standing in the Sunlight Radio Facebook page. You can find me under Cynthia Rose Medium on Facebook. And if you're listening live and you want to listen back, I have a YouTube channel that will list a playlist of all the shows. If you do, please give it a subscribe and help me. I'm trying to build up to enough listeners to get my own name. It's a new channel. And let's see, I'm on Instagram, Twitter. So you can find me pretty easy. And I love bringing guests such as we have today. We're all trying to do our best here. I'm going to tell you a little about Dr. Bradley Nelson before I bring him on. A holistic chiropractic physician and medical intuitive, Dr. Bradley Nelson is one of the world's foremost experts in the emerging fields of bioenergetic medicine and energy psychology. He has certified thousands of practitioners worldwide in helping people overcome unresolved anger, depression, anxiety, loneliness, and other negative emotions, and the physical symptoms associated with them. His best-selling book, The Emotion Code, provides step-by-step instructions for working with the body's healing power, and I'm excited to have him talk about the book today and wherever else we go, and I believe I still have him here with me. Welcome, Dr. Bradley.
I hope I'm still here. Thank you, Cynthia. Great to be on.
Well, always good to make sure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so welcome to the show. There's some little things I'm going to bring up about the book, but, why don't we start with, what made you write The Emotion Code? How did this come about? It's quite a good-sized number of pages in the book. Yeah, it's quite a good size.
Yeah, it is. The original book was about 72,000 words, I think, and we've just written the revision, which we're just going over the final edits on right now. It's going to be released as a hardcover, and it's about 90,000 words. We added another chapter on inherited trapped emotions, those inherited energies that we received from mom or dad at conception that they might have gotten from their mom or dad when they were conceived, and these can go back for many generations. So we have a new chapter there. We've got lots more information about trapped emotions and what they are. We got lots more stories from lots of other people. When The Emotion Code was first written 11 years ago and published, most of the stories in there were my own personal stories that I had experienced with my own patients. And since then, of course, we have certified around 5,000 people in 78 countries, and besides them, we've got hundreds of thousands of people doing this work all over the world, and so we have thousands and thousands of stories that have come in, and we have new stories coming in all the time, and so we've included some of those stories in the book. So it's going to be an exciting revision. We have a new foreword that was written by Tony Robbins. The book's coming out, and lots of endorsements from people like Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza. And it's coming out as a hardcover book in May from St. Martin's Press. So it's been a really interesting journey to get to this point. And I'll tell you how it really all started. It was back, really, to take you back to the very beginning, I'd have to take you back to when I was 7 years old. At age 7, I was really sick with the measles. And my parents had made a bed for me on the couch in the living room upstairs in our house so I could be near their bedroom. And I remember overhearing them talking about how the plan for me was the next day I was going into the hospital and going into something called an oxygen tent. You know how kids listen to their parents and they don't think that they're listening, but that the kids are listening,
Yes.
but they are, you know. And so I had been listening to them and I knew what the plan was. And the whole idea of going into some kind of a tent, I didn't know what the word oxygen meant probably, but I remember thinking that a tent sounded interesting, but I was really too sick to be able to enjoy it. So I didn't know what the point was. But anyway, sometimes there are things that happen to us in our lives that are so foundational and so profound that no matter how old we are, we remember every detail, even though we might be very young. And I think most of us have some event like that. Well, for me, this night was something that created memories for me that I will never, ever forget, no matter how long I live. What happened was my parents came into the room. Everyone else had gone to bed. I'm lying there on the couch feeling really sick. And my mother said to my father, as they walked into the room, she said, "Honey, will you kneel down and will you say a prayer so that our boy will be able to get well?" And so they did. Now, knowing my dad, this is probably the first time in my life that I'd ever heard him say a prayer out loud. But I think they were really worried about me. I was really sick. So here are my parents kneeling down by the side of the couch, and my dad starts praying this very humble, very heartfelt prayer. And in the middle of this prayer, I had something that I experienced. And if you can imagine being really, really sick one moment, and then the next moment, something started at the top of my head, and it went whoosh through my body to the soles of my feet, and I was healed instantly. And to go from being really sick one instant to being totally, completely, vibrantly healthy in the next instant is something that's so bizarre and so impossibly remarkable and crazy that you don't ever forget it. And so I remember every moment of this. And I remember listening. I held my tongue until my dad was done praying. I didn't want to interrupt him. I was a polite 7-year-old kid. But when he was done, I said, "I'm better. Heavenly Father healed me. God has healed me." And they said, "That's fine, honey. Go back to sleep. Tomorrow you're going into the oxygen tent and we're checking you into the hospital." But I knew I was better. And so the next day proved it. So that experience taught me that there's a higher power that we can draw upon for help. And that lesson stayed with me. And so fast forward about another 7 years, and I ended up with kidney disease that was for which there was no treatment or cure in Western medicine. But my life was suddenly at a standstill. My family's life, I was getting these horrific pains that were like being run through with a telephone pole or something. Just unbelievable pain that would take my breath away, knock me to the ground. Nothing they could do medically. It was about 50% fatal. And my parents decided that rather than giving up hope, they would try an alternative with me. And so they took me to some people who were old-time holistic doctors. And these people started doing something that apparently the medical profession didn't really know about. And within a matter of days, I started feeling better. And within about a month, I was totally well. And my parents took me back to the clinic, and they ran all the tests on me. And as I recall, they ran the test twice, and they said, "Well, it's a spontaneous remission. Whatever we did must have worked." And I knew in my heart that these people, these holistic doctors, had helped me. And so I decided at that point I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be the kind of doctor that actually helps people to heal in natural ways. And because they helped me, and they seemed to know what they were doing and they practiced out on the edge of town in the middle of a wheat field in a trailer house. So there was not a whole lot of money there, but all the money was in this big, beautiful stainless steel, gleaming, perfect medical clinic that my parents had taken me to initially, and they had nothing to offer me. So that's really kind of how this all got going. And when I got into practice, went to chiropractic school, graduated in 1988, when I got into my own practice down in Southern California, I developed this habit because I had learned at age 7 that there's this higher power that we can draw upon. We can ask for help. And later on, it was actually an answer to prayer that got me back into the healing arts after I got distracted for a number of years. And so when I got into practice and I started seeing patients, I got into this habit where before I would work on somebody, I would just take a moment and ask for some help. And it was just a silent prayer that I would offer. And nobody ever knew that I was doing that. It was a very private, just a momentary pause and a very personal thing. But I'll tell you something, Cynthia, there were times during those years, and I was in practice 20 years, during those years, there were times when somebody would come in to see me. They didn't know, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help them, didn't know how to approach their problem. And I would offer that silent prayer. And there were times in those situations where suddenly the information would just download to me like this massive data dump of information and just understanding of how to look at this. And here's how to conceive this. And here's how to approach this. And it was an amazing thing. And that only happened 4 or 5 times during all those years that I was in practice. But the rest of the time, it was just like receiving information by little impressions and little ideas and thoughts and feelings. And so that's really where the emotion code came from. It came from all those years of clinical practice, trying to help all these people. And what I found was no matter how old or young my patients were, no matter what they were suffering from, no matter what they'd been diagnosed with, whether it was something physical or mental or emotional, they all had something in common, and that was that they all had emotional baggage. And emotional baggage is something that we talk about sometimes, right? So, yes. Cynthia, let me ask you, have you ever used that phrase in reference to somebody else? Because I know I have, before I knew what I was talking about, and I think a lot of people do. We say things like, well, you know, that person has a lot of emotional baggage. And we're right when we say that. And we're even more right than we think, because we all have emotional baggage. Some of us do have more than others, but we all have it. And it has to do with the true nature of who we are and what we are, because we are beings of pure energy. And what I mean by that is that, of course, as you know, but for your listeners, if you look at your hand, for example, your hand looks pretty solid, but if you were to magnify your hand 1,000,000 times or so, you'd be looking face to face with a single individual atom. That's a building block of your hand. And if you were to look inside that atom, you'd see there's really nothing in there but empty space and some little infinitesimally tiny energies that are zipping around at the speed of light. And that's really what we are. We're beings of pure energy. So when you're feeling an intense emotion, what's going on a quantum level is you are experiencing a specific vibrational frequency. And every emotion has its own frequency. Every emotion has its own vibration, and they're all different. So if you're feeling anger, that's a different frequency. If you could measure that frequency, it would show up in your body if you're feeling really angry. On the other hand, if you were feeling an intense emotion of grief, that would be a different vibration, but it would also show up. So what happens is when you're feeling these intense emotions, you're feeling vibrations and frequencies, and if that emotional energy, if that feeling is too powerful, the energy of that emotion can become trapped in the body, and it forms what we call a trapped emotion. And a trapped emotion is literally a little ball of emotional energy from about the size of a baseball to about the size of a softball. And these things will lodge in the body, in the tissues of the body, and they will distort the normal energy field of the body. And this is the reason why these trapped emotions or emotional baggage is the number one underlying cause of physical pain that people have. Number one, 90% of all the physical pain that people have is due to their emotional baggage. Now, if you talk to the average person, what do you think the number one cause of physical pain is? Most people would say, well, they're not taking enough Vicodin or Excedrin or ibuprofen or whatever. But it's not a drug deficiency. It's the body trying to tell us that there's something wrong. And so it's a fascinating thing, but this is the number one thing that we see, the number one underlying cause of physical pain. So if you're listening to this right now and you're dealing with low back pain, it's probably emotional baggage that is the underlying cause of that. If you're dealing with a migraine headache or neck pain or back pain or carpal tunnel syndrome or knee pain, hip pain, abdominal pain, it's amazing what we have seen over the last 30 years doing this work in all these countries around the world. All of us have seen the same thing, that this physical pain that we have is mostly, the majority of it, is emotional baggage trying to let us know that it's there so that we can do something about it. It's really amazing.
It's interesting, I back years and years and years ago, I remember, I learned some spiritual healing, in the 70s and took some coursework, and this was shared with us. And then, Candace Pert, who wrote Molecules of Emotion. Sure. I remember, the interesting thing is when 1978, I think it was, there was a lady that came from England, and she was a healer, and she talked about, stored emotion or energy in somebody's knee and how they had pain. And then fast forward to, I think it was 90 or 91 when I heard Candace Pert on Bill Moyer's show and got her book talking about they had actually found these polypeptide chains of emotion that were stored in a knee. And so in 1990, I had a very serious car accident. So I was very keen on healing from this. So I was very determined that I would heal from this pain. But the journey that I had that's really is different is that I was all in for releasing any trapped emotions. I got completely committed. Only I would go through a journey that it would take me 17 years to end up in a surgeon's office where there was literally a structural issue that MRIs couldn't see. There was a problem. And so I went through this, why am I not healing? But by the time I ended up in the surgeon's office, I was saying, I'm in bliss. I'm happy. It's like I've dealt with all my stuff. The only component is now the body. So it's kind of a really opposite way to go about it. There was much learning in that, but I was so determined that I would just do it that way. So my experience was that there is no separation of body, mind, and spirit, because even though I had dealt with it all, oh, wow, we're going to the break already. I guess we'll finish that when we come back. It's gone so quickly. Okay, grab a glass of water, stretch your legs. We'll be back with Dr. Bradley Nelson talking about the emotion code.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hi, this is recording artist and composer Yuval Ran, inviting you to a voyage through the chakras, a new double album of guided meditations to transform your life, a sublime musical medicine for nourishing inner peace and reaching to your higher virtues. Get it now at metamindfulnessmusic.com, METTA mindfulnessmusic.com.
Some knowledge belongs to us and us alone. The way our girlfriends walk, talk, touch their hair. Details that only a sister can know about her girls. But what about our other girls? The ones we carry with us every day. Our bond with our sister girls gives life. But knowing your breasts can save it. Go to knowyourgirls.org for the facts you need on breast health. Brought to you by Susan G. Coleman and the Ad Council.
Okay, so we're back, and I was talking just a little bit about in my healing process going from so I had done a lot of personal work. I had done a lot of alternative therapy. I had just about gotten to the point where it was like I was doing energy work, which helped. I just it wasn't sustaining it. So I was very disciplined about it. So, the long and short of it was I had some mystical experiences telling me that it would be fine, that I'd be healed, and I surrendered. What will be, will be. And then I think because I ended up in that state in the surgeon's office, which is really interesting, although he had something showing what was wrong, there was disagreement between doctors on how much operating and how much to do. And so I had to put my trust in him. And really, I think if I hadn't been in the state of mind of where I was, I don't think he would have been the same. There was something about, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they found the problem. And so it was kind of like, But after I had the surgeries, I found that even though I felt like I had released so much, I was a functioning or on the road to being, physio and that functioning individual. And I felt like as my body was getting stronger, there was still more releasing and more releasing. And I had a very strange experience on an acupuncture bed where it was like it didn't make any sense. I was wearing a weighted ring around my neck. I had rocks on my back, and they were all coming off and they were getting lighter. And all I can wonder is that could some of that been part of the collective pain that I somehow was, I really don't understand that part of it. It was so very interesting. I just got lighter and lighter and lighter. And I knew that I was going to be healed. So when came time to do an operation, I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe a lot of people go through, I have pain and then, okay, well, I guess there's emotions. I was coming at it from, I must have emotional stuff. Let me clear it and then my body will get better. And then there literally was a structural issue. So, right. But I still experienced going through a feeling of body, mind, spirit, all healing at once, and very much spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you said a few minutes ago how I think you alluded to the connection between the mind and the body, and how we used to kind of think that we knew where one began and the other one ended, and now the dividing line between the mind and the body has blurred to a point where we really don't know anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
We're kind of all in a little bit of a state of confusion now about it. But the amazing thing about it is that the mind itself is I believe far more powerful than we give credit. I think that Well, when people die, for example, and they go to the other side, and they come back, and of course those are the only ones we hear from. The other ones die and they stay dead, but some come back sometimes, right? And then they write books about their experience. One of the interesting things that if you read those books that seems to be fairly consistent is that they mostly all talk about how their mind expands to this amazing degree, and they can see colors that they couldn't see before, and that they can think much more clearly. And some of them have said things like you can ask as many questions as you want simultaneously, thousands of questions, and the answers all flow in instantly and are understood perfectly. And I think that my own belief is that when we come into this world, I believe we lived before with God, and in a place of perfect abundance and positivity and love and everything. And then we come into this world for very specific reasons. And I think that our memories of that life before, where we lived with God, are closed off to us so that we don't remember those memories anymore. We don't have access to those, generally speaking. But let me tell you something. I had an experience when I was 18 years old, and I was just sitting one day meditating, and all of a sudden I had this profound experience that is like that other experience that I had when I was healed at age 7. This one also is burned into my mind in tremendous detail. What happened was I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden it was as if some part of me, part of my heart perhaps, had a little window opened, and part of me suddenly remembered where I lived before I came into this world, before I was born into this body that I'm in. And suddenly the result of this was that I was instantaneously filled with the most overwhelming, overpowering, impossibly powerful feeling of homesickness, beyond anything I can describe to you. Homesickness to be back there in that home where I lived before I came to this world, and where I believe we all lived. And this feeling was absolutely, completely overwhelming. It only lasted for about 3 seconds. It was like a window opened and then closed, but it left me just, absolutely reeling with awe. And I learned that I learned some things from this. I learned that we're really just traveling through this world. We're just passing through this world. We don't really live here. We don't really belong here. This isn't really where we're from, in other words. And I also learned that it's a really, really good thing that we lose that memory of where we used to be when we're placed into this world, because if we could remember, I absolutely believe that we would not be able to stand it here for 5 minutes. We would not be able to stand it here, because the place that we came from is on such a different level we can't even begin to imagine. And so here we are. We're all put into this world. We have this veil. I like to call it the veil of memory that is put over our mind, so we don't know what we're doing here. We wake up and boom, all of a sudden here we are, and we don't remember anything. I believe we've lived forever. We've got eons of time in those memories of ours somewhere, but we don't have access to that memory. And so here we are. And what are we doing here? Well, we're here to learn to choose for ourselves between right and wrong, and good and evil, and light and dark. And it's like a perfect testing environment if you think about it. Because we don't know anything from before. We don't remember anything. So here we are, and we get to make our own choices. And some people choose light, and some people choose darkness. And then eventually we leave this world, and then we get to live, I think, with the consequences and the karma that we've created. But anyway, it's a fascinating thing. And our emotional baggage, you see, what's interesting about that is that it interferes in these profound ways with our mental and emotional and physical health. For example, what we're finding is that the number one underlying causes of things like depression and anxiety and phobias and panic attacks and PTSD and eating disorders and self-sabotage of all kinds is our emotional baggage. And emotional baggage, trapped emotions, are also the single biggest underlying common denominator that's present in every disease process that we've seen now in 30 years or so, including things like asthma, infertility, and digestive disorders, and cancer. And really, every disease process that we've seen now in 3 decades has an emotional component. And the emotional baggage is different for every person. But the fascinating thing about this is that sometimes the analogy that I think of is if you were a detective, and every time you got a call to go check out a bank robbery site, you see the same white van parked across the street, you start to get kind of suspicious, right? And that's what we're finding. With every disease process, there's this same white van parked across the street, and it's full of people's emotional baggage. And so what we find is that by removing that emotional baggage, the immune system is improved, and things change in the body, and people are able to, in many cases, get better where sometimes otherwise they might not have. So it's a critically important thing for us to understand. We really are beings of pure energy. And of course, the quantum physicists like Albert Einstein and his contemporaries have been telling us that for over 100 years now. But it's time for us to really wake up to that fact and start taking care of our bodies for what they really truly are, which is energy. We're made of energy. And so energy medicine is the future, because energy medicine addresses the body for what it really truly is on a much higher level of understanding.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. What I find absolutely fascinating, perhaps this is part of my journey. At the time, I worked with a lady who'd been a physiotherapist who did some kind of soma energy work, and she said to me, I know somehow this is tied into your mediumship, psychic gifts. I just don't know how. And it's something that I find very interesting when I speak to people that have crossed over, that they'll give evidence of who they were, but if somebody had something incredibly heavy on this side, I feel the difference of what it was like to have it and what it's like to not have it. And sometimes they feel the need to describe it. Other times they don't. But it is quite interesting to me when people say, like, the karma, it's very self-created there, in a sense that, we don't escape the unkind acts because we're aware of how other people feel when we pass. But we're getting off topic here. One of the things that we're getting off topic, but how do you help people that come in to see you and they are maybe they've had this and this and this and this, and they've got layers. How do you get to the root of the problem with them?
Well, sometimes it takes time. Healing is really like archaeology, I think, because I've always been a fan of archaeology and subscribed to some magazines about it and so on, and I'm always interested in new discoveries and so on. And the healing process is like archaeology. In other words, you start with somebody, and as you start working with them, you're really peeling off layers, almost like an archaeologist will peel off a layer of soil, and then they're back 100 years, and they peel off another layer, and they're back a couple of 100 years, and so on. And it's fascinating how the body works. There are layers that show up for people, and as you're working with things, one of the fascinating things that the body will tend to do is it will tend to hold on to old symptoms, and then if you clear enough baggage away, all of a sudden sometimes the real problem will come back. And I saw this many times in practice. For example, I remember one particular patient that came to me with fibromyalgia, which is where you get pain all over the body. And medically, there's really no known reason for it, no known cause, and no real cure. Anyway, it was one of the things I worked with a lot when I was in practice. And as I was working with her, We worked on her for a while, and all of a sudden, after several months of working with her, she had kind of plateaued a little bit. She improved, and then she kind of plateaued for a while. And then all of a sudden, she comes into me and she says, listen, she says, I've got this tailbone pain that started yesterday. And she said, it's just absolutely exquisite. And she said, I didn't do anything. I said, well, did you fall or did you hurt your tailbone? No, didn't do anything. And I said, well, when's the last time your tailbone hurt like this? And she said, well, it was when I was 16 years old and I fell at the ice skating rink right on my tailbone. And guess what had happened? Well, when she fell, and she was in her 50s when I was working with her, but at 16 years old, she fell on the ice, fell on her tailbone. That injury had never really healed right. And so it was down at the bottom of a bunch of layers. So we had to clear off all these layers, and all of a sudden that injury came back. And now it was almost like it just happened, and it came back because now it was going to be able to heal where it didn't really heal before. And I saw that so many times. People would come in and they'd say things like, my ankle hasn't hurt like this since 1923 or something. And I'd say, oh, well, that's probably good. It's just, we've uncovered enough layers that it's going to be able to heal now. So it's interesting. I remember once I had a patient that came to me who had what had happened was about 4 years before, she was at a friend's new home. Her friend was having a housewarming party, and she was wandering around the home by herself, kind of looking around, and she went upstairs and she opened this balcony and she walked out onto this balcony, but the balcony hadn't been built yet. And so she fell 2 stories and landed on some boulders and landed right on her rear end. And what happened was she got a fracture of her third lumbar vertebrae, the vertebrae in the low back. And so she'd lived with chronic, constant pain since then. And so she came in and she brought in, she had x-rays of her back, and she brought in her x-rays, and I looked at her x-rays and I looked at her and I said, well, listen, I said, just because her bone actually, instead of looking like a square-shaped bone, it's how they normally should look, it looked like a triangle because it had collapsed. And I said, just because your back looks like this, and just because you have this broken bone that's healed now, but it's misshapen and so on. I said, just because you have this doesn't mean you should have to be in pain. I said, let's start working with you and try to figure out what the underlying causes of your pain are. And so we started working with her. One of the things that we found right off the bat was that she had a lot of emotional baggage from when she was young, around a certain age. And she told me that she was sexually abused for a number of years, starting at that age. And, of course, she had memories of all of it and so on. So we cleared that emotional baggage, and we can only clear so much in a visit. The body can clear 8 to 10 separate trapped emotions typically in a visit, and then you're done, and you have to wait and come back in a day or so. And so after about a month of working with her, she came back into me and she said, I'm just not getting any better. She said, I appreciate all the work that you're doing, but I'm just not feeling any better. I'm going to go and try physical therapy now. And I took her by the arm and I pulled her into my X-ray room actually, and I shut the door, and I looked at her and I said, listen, I said, you can't do this. You can't do this to me. I said, you can't do this to you. I said, we are so close. We've been working on this, peeling off all these layers. I said, we're so close to figuring this out. You cannot stop now. You're so close. And she said, okay. So it was on, I believe, the following visit that we had cleared away enough layers that we were finally able to figure out what the beginning of this was, the deepest underlying cause of this. And what it was actually an infection. Cats carry this parasite called toxoplasmosis. And you've heard, most people I think have heard that pregnant women, for example, should never change the litter box. And this is why, because cats carry this disease, this parasite, and it can cause deformities in a developing baby. Well, anyway, she had a cat, got this infection. When she broke this bone in her back, this infection from her cat went right into that area and set up housekeeping. Well, she already had all kinds of emotional baggage there, but we had to clear off all those layers to finally get to this infection. And I was able to give her some natural herbs and things to take care of that infection. And within a couple of days, she was totally pain-free, even though her X-ray had not changed at all So it's interesting how the body works. But I'll tell you what I have learned, Cynthia, is that the body knows, the subconscious mind knows with a perfect understanding what's wrong and what to do.
Well, that's a great story. Okay, we'll be back. One more last break with Dr. Bradley Nelson.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Tune in to The Practical Intuitive, Mind, Body, Spirit for the Real World with me, host Robin Fritz, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 Eastern. I'll cover personal and business intuition, animal communication, mediumship, space clearing, past life regression, shamanic insights, energy healing, soul choice, and more, all to help you tap your own intuitive and healing skills. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Hi, this is New Age Grammy winner Paul Avgerinos. Thanks for listening to OMTimes Radio, and please support my peaceful healing music with a purchase at iTunes, Amazon, or wherever you shop for fine music. Just put my name into the search engine, Paul Avgerinos. A, V like Victor, G like George, E-R-I-N-O-S. You can also visit me at roundskymusic.com. Thanks for listening, and I'm wishing you the brightest of blessings.
GTG, BRB, OMW, be there in a few. You may think that these kinds of texts are fine because of their length, and you can easily send them at a stoplight. But no, answering one text can take your attention away from the road for 5 seconds. And traveling at 55 miles an hour, that's enough time to travel the length of a football field. Make good decisions, don't text and drive.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org, a message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, Noise, and the Ad Council.
Okay, good to be back. I would love it if you would share, and I love that story that you shared about, I think it is that old saying, darkest before dawn, don't give up. And any listeners out there suffering, I encourage you to keep on. I think my determination got me where I needed to get, and for whatever reason, the way it went. So I highly recommend this, but I would love it if you would share just also about the World War II pilot and the testing that they did. Just anybody's on the fence there about energy. I think that really is a really great story. And
sure.
Going to the other the other location with the cells. Yeah, if you could share that, that's great.
Absolutely. Well, this is a study that was done a number of years, probably 20 or so years ago, where they took a man who had been he had experienced life on an aircraft carrier in World War II in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese, and what they did is they brought this man into they showed him newsreels. Now, first of all, they took blood out. I'm trying to remember exactly how the story went. They took blood out of him, and they spun down the blood, and they were able to take the white cells out of his blood. Now, the white cells are the cells that are crawling around in your body all the time looking for invaders and looking to engulf those invaders. And they were able to measure the electrical responses of those cells right next to him, and they hooked him up to electrodes, and they were able to measure his responses as well. And so what they did is they showed him newsreel films of kamikaze aircraft attacking, diving down, and blowing up on these ships. Now, of course, he had lived through this, and it was a terrifying experience for him. And many times he didn't think he was going to survive this. And so to see this all over again on these newsreels created these immediate responses in his nervous system that showed up on the equipment that they were using to measure his responses, but it also showed up in his white blood cells. Well, so then they
his white blood cells that are outside of his body, sitting
outside
in a petri dish.
Exactly, in a petri dish. And so then they were able to take those cells and drive them some distance away, and even at a distance of several miles away, they kept very careful records of when they were showing him these videos. They'd show them the video, record his responses, and then allow him to relax for a while. And then they'd show him the videos again and record the responses. And they were doing the same thing. They were just measuring the responses of his white blood cells miles away. And when they compared notes, they found that the responses that his physical body was giving when he was watching these newsreels about the kamikaze attack, his responses in his physical body were exactly the same responses that were being elicited by his white cells that were miles away in a petri dish. So those white cells were connected to him even though he was all those miles away. Well, you see, that doesn't make any sense in the world of Newtonian physics. It doesn't make any sense in the world of Western medicine, because Western medicine is based on Newtonian physics. But now that we're in the world of quantum physics and we start to understand the connectedness of things, and we start to understand how there is action at a distance and all of these strange phenomena that take place in quantum physics, we start to realize, okay, we are part of quantum physics. Our bodies operate on quantum physics, and that's how the world actually works. So it actually does start to make sense. And of course, one of the things that another great proof of this is the fact that we have almost 5,000 practitioners now in 78 countries around the world as of right now. And many of them work with clients in other countries. Most of those clients, they'll never actually meet, and yet they've changed the lives of many of them. And so all of a sudden, here we are in the 21st century, and this kind of thing is being done routinely now, where it would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, even 15 probably.
Sure. And this is one reason I have the show is that, I meet people all the time. They may, oh yeah, sure, energy is real, but no, I'll just go and I'll do things the way things have always been done. It sort of needs to be more in the public eye more and more and more, because people see this as extraordinary instead of the norm, which certainly could be the norm. It is the norm, but that's the reason we have this, is because there's so much going on that people are not aware of. They're aware of, it's almost like they're aware of the history of 20 years ago as opposed to the history of what's been going on for the last 20 years. Like, this is a 20-year-old study. That's kind of amazing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It might actually be a little bit older than that. I really don't remember. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, there's so much information out there. If you start to look into the heart, for example, of course, Western medicine, by and large, still believes that the heart is just a pump and that's all it is. But there's research now that's been, again, for about 20 or so years, it's been coming out and saying that, well, guess what? The heart is not just a pump. It's much more than just a pump. In fact, it was back in the 1960s. Doctors started doing heart transplants and started finding out that after a heart transplant, oftentimes patients would come back to them and they would relate strange things. For example, that their taste in sports or food or music had completely changed. Sometimes their handwriting would completely change. Sometimes they would have memories of places that they never in their lives had visited, and yet now they had memories of being there after their heart transplant. And so in every case, when these people were taken and connected to the family of the donor, in every case they would find out, oh, yes, that's our son's handwriting that now you have. How bizarre is that? Or, yes, our daughter loved classical music and was a violinist in the symphony, and I guess that explains now why you loved classical music. And yes, those same passages that you're playing over and over, those were her favorite pieces. You know, this is the kind of thing that whole books have been written about. They've done studies now using a machine called a magnetocardiograph, where they can measure the magnetic field of the body. And when they started doing that, they found that the heart puts out this massive magnetic field that extends out around the body up to 12 feet. Feeling love or affection for a person, your heartbeat will actually become measurable in the brain waves of that other person. Think about that. So there's this communication going on between all of us all the time. And one of the most important parts of the emotion code is that we have found that the heart will often put up a wall around itself made from layers of your emotional baggage to protect itself. It's a mechanism, a self-defense mechanism that the subconscious mind will initiate to protect the heart from being totally broken at some point. And, you know, most of us, I think, at some point in our lives have felt like our heart was going to break. And we felt that physical sensation, you know, like then there's an elephant sitting on our chest, or like we can't breathe. Cynthia, have you ever in your life felt that?
Yeah, I actually have been through that awareness of a shield, and then I actually had a very strong dream that told me I didn't need it anymore and I could let it go. And then I did some conscious work to let it go. It was pretty profound. Yes, I'm very aware of that. That I called it a shield, your heart wall I called a shield, and I became very aware that there was layers that came off, and then it was like I don't need it anymore. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what we have found is that 93% of people have this phenomenon going on. And what it does is it interferes with your ability to really love and connect with other people, to give and receive love. It interferes with your ability to really manifest that perfect creation that is in your heart, that perfect blueprint to create the life that you want. And so in the book, we teach people how to get rid not only of all their emotional baggage, but especially how to get rid of that emotional baggage that surrounds the heart. Because when that wall is taken down, amazing things happen. Oftentimes people fall in love who never ever thought they would. People have creative ideas that start to flow to them automatically. All kinds of amazing things happen that don't seem to otherwise happen unless that wall is taken down. So that's one of the key things that's in the emotion code. So we're excited because we have the new emotion code book coming out in hardcover. It's expanded and updated. And again, that's got a whole new chapter on inherited emotions.
And when will that?
Hardcover.
When will?
Yes.
And do you have a date for that, or?
Yeah, it's coming out on May 7th in hardcover with a foreword by Tony Robbins and lots of other endorsements and plugs by people like Greg Braden and so on. And you can pre-order it in hardcover on Amazon.com is the easiest way to find it.
And while we're at that, because we only have a few minutes left, you want to make sure we don't miss you being able to give people a website or information that you want to make sure they have. I always do that at the end of my show. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our website's easy to remember. It's called discoverhealing.com, discoverhealing.com. And there's lots of good information there about all these things that we're doing. We have events that we're doing around the world at various different times. And so that's all there as well. And if you go to that site, you can actually get some free information about the emotion code. And So it's discoverhealing.com. And we have a free emotion code starter kit there that you can just click on, and you can download that, and that will give you the first 2 chapters of the book, the flowcharts and PDFs, and also an 8-video series called Introduction to Energy Healing. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm really grateful to have you on the show and sharing some of your personal story there at the beginning was lovely, and I'm so glad you're doing, standing in your sunlight to make your difference. I think what you're talking about there, Eckhart Tolle talks about it as the pain body. I mean, it's such important work, so needed in today's world.
Yeah, it is indeed. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for all the good that you're doing in the world. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you having me on your show. And we'll do it again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Okay, we'll see you all next week. Okay. All right. Thanks so much. That was great.